Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. This is always Amy, and I am your host, Amy. Thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you so much for all of the support you guys have shown me really from the past two episodes. And for those who have stuck around for such a long time, there's been such a huge gap between, I guess you could consider it my first season and this season. And so I'm super excited to be able to come back to something that I really loved doing for so long and being able to share a lot of what I've learned in the time that I've been away. Most of it has really been throughout just the pandemic alone. And I feel like a lot of us have been through a transformative period, especially now having had all of this time and really the space to do what's necessary for ourselves. So I feel like I did that for myself, and we're going to have a great conversation. And I hope you guys really enjoyed this episode. I'm basically interviewing myself in some capacity, but for the most part, I'm going to just be sharing what I've learned really over the pandemic, what I've been up to, done a couple of cool things, and I'm really excited to share that with you guys. And yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that I really want to do is share with you guys, who I am. Why did I start this podcast? How did it come about? So we're going to go over some of that stuff. I am actually from Westchester, New York. So I'm from a smaller town called Peekskill. Westchester is the county. And I grew up in Peekskill. This is so weird for me because I'm so used to interviewing other people that it feels weird to interview myself. But so I grew up in Peekskill. I've been here my whole life, pretty much born and raised, born in Valhalla, if you guys know where that is. And lived here in Peekskill pretty much my whole life. There was a short time when I lived in Buchanan / Verplank. Buchanan Verplank, I don't know if those are two different places, but so I spent some time when I was very young on the border of like Buchanan and Peekskill. So I have some history in the area, and I've honestly, for the most part, like I feel like I've just grown up in Peekskill. So anyways, since then, where have I been? I don't know. This is so weird for me. So I've been here my whole life, graduated from all the Peekskill City schools. And I went on to go to Westchester Community College, where I studied journalism. I always knew that journalism was something that I wanted to do. It felt like the right thing to do and felt very in alignment with what I wanted to pursue at the time, which was something related to communicating, but also being able to share information with people, giving people the resources and the tools essentially to make their own decisions, right? And that's a lot of what the news is being able to present to you what's happening, the facts that are being presented to you, so you can come, I guess, not really to your own conclusion, because if they're facts, they're already concluded, but to essentially just make sure that you know what's happening and know what's going on in the world. And that was something that I felt super passionate about at the time. So journalism was like the thing that I wanted to do. And I'm glad that I did it, because it really gave me the experience that I needed to do stuff like this. And then later on to, work as a legislative aide, which we will get into a little later. So I went to Westchester Community College, did 2 years there. And then I transferred over to SUNY Albany, or the University at Albany. It's a state school. Great time there. I met so many incredible people, made some really great friends while I was there. Continued to really expand my experience with journalism, and eventually I ended up double majoring with journalism as my primary major, and then poli-sci, political science, as my second major. So when I did that, it gave me the opportunity to start being more political and really just exploring that area and that field a lot more than I originally shared an interest in. I've always been interested in politics and having these conversations that sometimes felt really taboo to have, depending on like when we were having them. For example, immigration is like a big one. Obviously we've made some progress, but it's still something that some people are like, we all know somebody who is like, well, if you're undocumented, you should be here legally. So, conversations like that were stuff that I would have at my house, talking about socialism, talking about revolutions, all of these larger conversations around equity honestly, really surrounding equity was really important to me. And it was something that I grew up with my dad. And we always had these conversations. And I don't know why, but he, in a lot of ways, influenced me to care about these things. And I also just had, I think, a natural feel for it. Like I've always felt very passionate about important subjects and really caring about people. I think at the basis of everything that I've done so far has been about caring about people, if that makes sense, and wanting the best for everybody, including myself and my parents, and just people I loved in general. And so I think that's why we've had so many of those conversations. And then when I went to school, poli-sci felt like something that I could pursue, and it ended up being the best decision that I made in college because it gave me a chance to meet other people who were also interested in political science, and really just politics in general, and understanding government a lot more than just having a kitchen talk conversation, something that you would do at home only. And it was cool. I learned a lot of different philosophies and really some different theories and really like how people thought throughout history. And I think it's really interesting because a lot of that stuff still resonates even today. And it's actually kind of unfortunate, I think, that it still resonates today, because I feel like we should have progressed so much more than, where we started or where we've been. And it's weird because a lot of things feel like they're kind of going backwards instead of going forwards, but we made a lot of progress. Regardless, I went to SUNY Albany, did the double major, and one of my top experiences, actually, which I highly recommend to anybody who's still in college, if you have the opportunity and the means to go, please do a study abroad. I did one for the summer to get enough credits to make sure I graduated on time, and I ended up going to Cuba. I actually have a whole episode dedicated to Cuba, but that might actually be lost somewhere in limbo because I have a couple of episodes that have been uploaded to SoundCloud, and unfortunately they're not here, or I don't know where they are. They might have been deleted or not. So if I find it, I will absolutely link it up below. If I don't find it, then I feel like I might just have to share again, really my experience in Cuba, because it was amazing. So if you're in college, definitely go. If you have a chance to travel there, definitely go as well. I think there's so much to learn in Cuba, and I think it gave me also what I needed in terms of being able to see life from different perspectives, because a lot of the really the conversations we have around Cuba are so negative here. And then when I actually went there, it was a completely different story, like talking to the people who actually live there, listening to different perspectives, seeing how people felt about the Castro regime. So it was very interesting. And like I said, if you guys want more detail on that, I'm happy to give you guys some more information. But definitely did a study abroad that absolutely changed my life, I think, because it gave me a chance to also get out of my shell. And that was one of the first times that I think I was really away from home for such an extended amount of time. I think it was 6 weeks that I was away, and it was amazing. And it was really hard at the same time, because for the first time, I think, in all of my life, I had to really be somewhere without the help of people that I knew and the comfort of those people. And so it was really helpful for me to do that, because eventually it made me feel more comfortable being around people and doing things on my own, which I think up to that point, like I was okay with doing, like I'm okay with doing things by myself, but truly like alone where you're somewhere completely different was amazing and truly worth it. And so that was one highlight that I had, and I would say that's my biggest highlight in college. After I graduated in 2018, and I went on to work as a intern for a newspaper up in Schenectady, New York, which is about, I think, 30 minutes or so from Albany, New York. So it wasn't like that far of a commute, or like 20 minutes, something like that. So it wasn't very far of a commute, and it was a great experience too. Like I said, at the time, I was super passionate about politics, and I thought I was going to be a political writer. And that was really my aspiration at the time. I was like, I want to be a political writer. I want to be able to cover the news, politics, political news, and just be able to present that to people and start to have these really good conversations around how we perceive certain things. And hopefully, I don't know, I kind of thought that maybe like it would just turn into something so much more larger, and eventually it did. But I think just at that time, like I was also very much like, okay, this is just what I want to do. Like I'm going to pursue politics and the journalism field. And it was a good experience for me to be there. Also, every experience I think is good for you, regardless of whether it's good or bad. But, you know, during my time there, I realized that I don't know how much I liked the idea of being stuck at a table and doing work. Like my highlight in that job was being out in the field, was talking to people, being able to ask questions and saying, you know, where are you from and how did you get here? And I was always really interested, even in school, I was always really interested in the how, and you know, how did this come about, or how did you get here, or really stuff like that. And you know, I really felt like it was important for me to know that stuff and ask meaningful questions to people in order for me to get to the root of whatever it is I was supposed to be covering, or whatever conversation I was supposed to have, or whatever the subject was. I always felt like having a meaningful question being presented that was kind of personal felt like it opened the door to so much more than just having a straightforward conversation and just getting what I need and then moving forward, right? So I think that's something that I learned and was my biggest skill at the time. And it was something that I had cultivated obviously over time, because it wasn't something that, you know, I think somewhat came naturally, but I also feel like it was something I had to really learn to cultivate. And I did when I was there, and I was happy that I found that out. And then that was actually it for my journalism career in terms of actually working for a newspaper. When I was in school, I did some articles, I wrote some, and they were really good. I got some great feedback at the time too. And I really enjoyed it, but it was time for me to kind of move forward from that. And at that point, it had been the summer after I graduated from school. I then moved back home to my hometown and decided that I would find a job in the area and, you know, just kind of see what else was out there and see what else could be done and what other things maybe I wanted to do. So I was still interested in journalism jobs because I remember applying to a bunch of them, thinking like, okay, this was going to be it. Like I remember my dream job would have been to work for the New York Times or for NPR. I love NPR. If you don't listen to NPR, I think I like it better than the New York Times, if I'm being really honest. And yeah, so, you know, it was something that I still wanted to do, but, you know, obviously life had different plans for me. And I'm super grateful for the change of course, or yeah. And, you know, I'm happy that everything kind of played out the way that it did. So I moved back home, and here I took up a job working as a kind of an administrative role, administrative assistant. Yeah. So I worked as an administrative assistant, and that was great too. It was great because more than anything, I was working for a company / nonprofit that was actually not a company, a nonprofit that was the nonprofit that I actually used to go to for theater when I was younger. So it was a big it was, you know, it was like a full circle moment. And it was great because I was not expecting to work there, nor did I even realize at the time that that was like what was happening. And then I was like, oh shit, like I'm actually working now for the same company or for the same nonprofit that used to provide these programs. And so I was so happy to be there because I'm like, this is my chance to kind of give back, to be more closer to my community. And what I wanted more than anything, I remember coming back from college, was being more involved and just being more supportive of the community that helped me grow. And I feel like it's important to give back as much as you possibly can. So that's essentially what I did. So then after I was there for a couple months, and then eventually it felt like I was no longer growing. I felt like I was using my skills and using what I had learned in my, internship, but also just in school. But it still felt like at some point it started to feel like it wasn't what it was in alignment with me anymore. And I remember having this conversation with this gentleman who was working there, and he happened to be there on commission doing a project for the nonprofit. And we had this really great conversation. And I'm a huge believer in like divine timing and that nothing happens for a reason. And I remember at that time I was really debating whether I should leave or not, because it had only been about 8 or 9 months And I'm like, I feel like I haven't been here that long. Like, I felt really bad, first of all, leaving a job that needed my commitment for about a year. I think it was a year that she wanted me to commit. And I felt really guilty for, leaving, because it seemed like this was something that was working out. It was working for her. And, I didn't want to let anybody down at the time. I think that's something that I've struggled with a lot, just more generally, is like letting people down. And so, this gentleman was here and he was doing his work, and it had been like the second or third time that I think we were meeting, because he was doing work while I was working there in the studio. And we had this conversation about like him having worked in a journal, like as a journalist, and he was like in his cubicle. I remember that vividly. He was like, I used to work as a journalist, and, I was in my cubicle doing my thing. And eventually he said he realized that he wasn't happy. He always had a passion for art, for painting, and that was what he really wanted to do. And I remember him saying that, like, eventually he had to decide whether or not he was going to continue staying here, staying in his position as a journalist and or moving on and trying to do something different. So he said he ended up leaving his job and he pursued his art, and he said it took off like crazy. He was like, I felt like he knew that it was the best thing that he did for himself. He ended up traveling to do other commissions that were asked of him. And so that really helped me make that final decision of like, okay, I don't want to be here. And as much as I might feel guilty for doing something that might hurt someone else, I'm only hurting myself in the long run if I don't leave, and if I don't actually take this risk. And he really pushed me, and he really helped me understand the importance of taking that risk. And really taking a leap of faith forward and saying, even if you don't know what will happen, just know that if you're pursuing what you love the most and what you care about, everything will work out. So at that time, I was like super nervous. I'm like, okay, I'm going to leave this job. Like, I haven't been here that long. I feel really bad. Just all of these like small things that were like piling up in my head. And I was just thinking like, okay, like what am I going to do? So I ended up coming to the conclusion that it was time for me to move forward. So, I decided to put in my 2 weeks notice, and, I kind of wrapped things up and whatnot. And so, I felt like I had learned everything that I could in that time and in that role. And I'm thankful for it, because the woman who ran the nonprofit is an incredible individual who did so many great things for the community by providing these programs. And she inspired me really to be my own boss, essentially, right? And I think a lot of us, especially now, are in this time period where it's like, I want to be my own boss. I want to be able to do what I want to do by myself, and just pursue what makes me the happiest. And she showed me that hard work definitely does pay off, and there's bumps in the road always, but as long as you continue to work towards your goal, like, you will absolutely get there. And so, I was really happy that we had that conversation. And, after that, I actually went to Ecuador. So I spent some time there. I think I was there for like 3 weeks. And that was actually the second time that I was anywhere alone, or actually that I was in Ecuador alone, because I usually travel with family. And my experience there traveling alone has been so helpful for me. Like, I feel like every time I've traveled somewhere alone, like, I've always learned something new about myself. And it's just good to be able to give yourself the time to hang out with yourself rather than hanging out with other people, because I think that we can get caught up in just hanging out with other people and forget to tend to ourselves and our own needs. So I went to Ecuador, had a great time. I have some clips and some videos on my YouTube also, so if you're interested, check them out. And I really loved it. I've always loved taking pictures, video, editing, like all of that stuff. For whatever reason, I've always really enjoyed it. It feels like fun, like an activity, and it always just feels really natural to me. So I did some of that while I was there, and also did some other videos and stuff. And once I got back, it's funny, actually, before I actually went to Ecuador, I was talking to a couple of people at the time regarding being involved locally. And this happened after I interviewed the former mayor, or the mayor at the time of Peekskill. And it was cool because I interviewed him, and then after that my political career just like took off really fast, and it seemed like everything was in full alignment, and I was doing my podcast at the time, so that also really helped too. And I left my job in part to pursue the podcast full time and see it grow and fulfill what I wanted to fulfill at the time. And I was like, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to work by myself, I want to do these things alone. And so I was doing the podcast, interviewed the mayor, and then after that I was like, get me involved locally. Like I want to be able to do stuff. I want to give back to my community. And and then after that we I started meeting people and going to events, and it just happened so fast. And then before I knew it, I was being asked to be campaign manager for the local Democratic slate in Peekskill, and I think I was like 22 at the time, or 23, something like that. And I was so just impressed with life, God, the universe, whoever. Like I was so impressed with how everything turned out. And what I said before about taking that leap of faith, it really sunk in for me then at that time once I started meeting different elected officials. And I remember the first person I met was Andrea Stewart-Cousins, who, for those of you guys who don't know, is actually the majority leader for the Democrats on a state level. And so, it was amazing because I just remember thinking, like, I feel like I left my job. I was scared, but I knew that this was something I loved to do. And it started taking me towards people that I, were doing stuff with their lives as well. And then I ended up, being in this political circle, which was so unexpected because, like I said, I thought that I was going to be doing this more like journalistic work, and then politics kind of pulled me in, and I was happy to be there because I'm meeting all these great people, and I'm also, just being able to use my skills and what I've learned in school. So I was continuing to expand like who I was, and I thought it was really cool. At the time, I started meeting all these different people, and, just being in spaces where I didn't think I would ever be. All because I decided to pursue something that made me happy, which was interviewing people at the time, and which is what I'm continuing to do with this podcast. And so I started to do that. I run their campaign. It ends up being super successful, and all four of them win. So at the time it was the mayor, and it was 3 council people who were running, and 3 council women, and so they all won. It was great. And I remember it took so much, and I didn't get paid very well for it at the time either. I kind of just took on the job, and I was like, regardless of the money and what I'm making from this, like, I know that this is an opportunity for me to meet more people and to learn from these individuals and make the connections that I need to potentially help me move forward in my career. So I did that, and it was great. Surreal feeling, having invested so much time and really the energy, because it takes a lot to run campaigns, and to be on top of it is a lot. It takes a lot of mental energy, and really it takes stamina, because you got to keep up. You got to do it for months. If any of you guys have worked on campaigns before, you know how difficult it is to be campaigning for so long, and how rough it can be, because you're working with various individuals, and on top of that you're also working very tight deadlines, and working behind the scenes is very different than being at the front, which is really interesting. And I'm glad that I have that, that comparison, because it was very different being at the front of a campaign instead of being behind the scenes. But it was great. And I remember meeting so many good people who were so interested in changing the political world and the dynamic that we have. And it ranged really from very left-leaning Democrats to very more, I guess you could say, more conservative Democrats, right? I feel like if anyone who would be considered a conservative Democrat would be pissed if I said that. But it's true. We have more Democrats. We have Democrats who are more on the conservative, and I don't say conservative in like a derogatory way, nor do I even think it is a derogatory term, and it's not meant to be. It's just, you know, you have more conservative values, and so or you have different priorities. I like to think of it that way. So you know, it was interesting to work with all these different people, but one thing that consistently kind of came back to me was remembering that, you know, what was my purpose, and also what is it that I wanted to see change in the political in politics, in the way that it worked for people. What was important to me? I was a big Bernie Sanders fan for a long time. Like, the first time I ever saw him was in college when he first ran for president, and I remember being so inspired by him. He was probably the first political figure that I was inspired by, and then, you know, it was really just so insightful to see and inspiring to see somebody advocating for things that really mattered to people, to everyday people, who help make this country work. And so, you know, really just basic necessities is how I see it, is what he advocated for. A lot of people might disagree with me, but, you know, so I felt really compelled to also question myself and whether or not I was doing what was right for me, what felt in alignment to me. I tried to follow what feels the best for me, even if it changes over time. So at that time, it felt good to be working with the Democratic Party and the committees to make it possible. And I'm glad that it was possible. But I think over time, I also started to see that the political world and the people in it are not always, it's not always what it's made to seem, right? And I think it's easier said than anything, but I do believe that the political field is very, very hard, and it can be very frustrating, especially as a young person. When I first, like I said, stepped in, it was like 23, 24, something like that. Or like 24, I think. And, you know, it was interesting. It was definitely interesting. And I enjoyed having these conversations, of course. Like, I wanted to learn from different people. I wanted to see what people had to say about different things. And, you know, eventually it was fine. It always was. But I started to think, you know, is this the kind of work I want to be doing? Like, am I advocating for what I truly believe in? And that's kind of what led me to also run for office. And I actually have something really cool to show you guys that I've kept. I like to keep a lot of memorabilia, so like random things or something that seems significant, I always like to keep. So I kept this piece of material that I have from my campaign that I ran. I ran alongside a couple other folks, and so you know, I ended up getting a lot more closer to the more progressive Democrats in the area, and then eventually Vanessa Agudelo, who has run for New York State Assembly, who's been on the Peekskill City Council. We were friends. She was someone I worked with. She invited me actually to be part of the green light advocacy that was happening at the state level. And I was actually one of the people, she invited me to be one of the people to help close or to block the chambers, the Senate chambers at the state level in Albany. And it was such a great experience. So shout out to Vanessa for doing that. And, you know, like I said, she just recently ran for New York State Assembly. And we were, you know, she was the first person who came to me. She was like, would you consider running for city council? And I was like, yeah, of course I will. You know, I always felt like running for office was something I wanted to do. Actually, not always, but once I started getting politically involved, I was like, I want to do this. And especially seeing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez run and be successful was also a really big, something really big for me. And it really hit home for me too, because I've never really seen somebody, you know, with, I guess, similar backgrounds at that level, at a congressional level, you know, just in government in general. And so she was really a really big influence to me. And then Vanessa was also somebody that I very much looked up to, you know, and she was like, let's do it. And so it was her and a couple other folks. Like, we had a group of individuals who were politically, I guess, aware of what was happening in the town and in the city of Peekskill. And so, we all decided, there was a group of us, and we all kind of presented forward, like those who were interested in running, to come forward. So I came forward, and I was one of them. Connor Green, who was our mayoral candidate, came forward too. There were a couple other people actually who were interested, who were like, I would put my name in. And then eventually it came down to being me, Vanessa, Amy Perlow, and Connor Green for mayor. So it was 3 candidates for city council, and then it was our mayoral candidate. And we were running against Vivian McKenzie, who was our current mayor at the time here in Peekskill. It was Kathy Talbot and Patricia Riley. And who else was there at the time? Oh, and at the time there was also Dwight. His name is Dwight. His last name is Dwight. But I'm blanking on his first name, so my apologies. And so we ran against them, and it was, we were in a primary. And for those of you guys who don't know what a primary is when you have Democratic candidates who are seeking to be on the ballot. And so a primary is a time when all of the candidates can come together and present their best ideas forward and really what they're looking to do at whatever level of government they're running for. And then the people make a decision. And then, after primary day, whoever makes it out, the 4 or the 2 candidates or whatever, how many candidates, whoever gets the most votes, they then move on to the general election. So small breakdown. And so I want to show you guys this really cool piece of merch, I guess you can call it. And it's really cool. I'm actually really happy that I have it. So we have this little guy. I'm going to show you the back of this, but we had business cards that we made. And this one happens to have information like what the ballot was going to look like. So that way you could take it with you. And if you needed, some help just remembering our names, like you could remember it. And then on the front, we ended up putting like the days. I want to show you guys, but it's going to pick up the other stuff too. But if you can see it, it has like information on like where you're going to vote, when, if you needed a ride to the poll, our last names are on there. And it's so weird because, yeah, I ran for office, but like it feels like I didn't. I don't know. And this is the poster we made, and we stuck it around town. Different shops, went to different places, delis, just made sure people knew when. We had them in English and Spanish. And this is what we made. And it really is so amazing. And I give myself a really big pat on the back for doing this. And obviously our faces are on there. So there's me, there's the other Amy, and then we have Vanessa, and then we have Connor. So here you have the calendar, and I just stuck this at the bottom. But yeah, and it's just a really cool thing that I have, and it's so weird to see myself on this. Like I think, like I look at it sometimes, I'm like, oh, like I really did that. And I've never really been the kind of person to share this stuff, like unless it's for my job or like I have to. I don't like to be boastful, but I do feel like this is definitely one of the greatest accomplishments that I've made in my life. I've accomplished in my life. And I'm super grateful that I had this chance to do this. And really to be advocating for things that were important with other people who cared about the same things. So that was something that really made me happy. And even though we didn't win, I was really, really thankful that I got to run for the first time, run for office for the first time, with people who also had the same ideology, shared the same ideology as me. Not always 100%, but still so much more in alignment with me and my beliefs than I think a lot of people from the establishment Democrats, if you will. And it was great. I really loved it. I had a great time. I met so many people. I got to listen to people again. It was still very much centered around helping people and trying to find a solution to helping or alleviating some of the problems we had that we could alleviate, because there are things that you can do on, you know, on a local level, but then at some point you have to keep going higher if you want to accomplish more. So it was great. And just being able to listen to the people in my community, reach out to people that I knew, that I went to school with. It was a little weird because I felt like I was running into people who I knew or I used to know. And, you know, my name was out there, and it was really a whole thing, you know, and like I said, even though we didn't win, I feel like it gave me a sense that there was this energy for and a need for change, and I was happy to be part of that change. So I was very, very excited to do it. I wish I had put in more work, because I think that, I don't know if it would have made a difference, but I wish I had put in more work. I will say that. But still, it was the first time that I had been doing, you know, I had ever done anything like that. And I was scared. Like, I remember I went through some issues at work at the time as well. And, you know, because it was such, you know, like I was working for the government, but at the same time I was running for office. And so there was some conflict there, but because I was doing it on my own time, like I had to be super careful with everything. So I felt very restricted in running for office. And I didn't want to be. And that's one thing that I think that if I were to ever run for office again, I would make sure that I didn't have any of those limits, because when you're limited and you're trying to do something and trying to accomplish something, it can be hard when you're restricted. So making sure that you don't have those restrictions is going to be helpful. But I think regardless, I'm still happy that they happened, because it gave me an idea of like what kind of space I was really in. And that was really important for me. And it was super eye-opening, because I'm like, okay, this is what I'm essentially going up against. This is what I have to keep in mind. And it was helpful. It was definitely helpful. And like I said, I met some great people. We did some great fundraising activities, had some great events, and it was good. But I do wish that I had waited a little longer, because I feel like I knew so much more after the fact. And, you know, it is what it is now. But yeah, this is, it still like kind of boggles my mind, because I look at it and I'm like, why do I feel like this is like a concert flyer or something? And I just love it. And I love the people who I ran with. Amy Perlow, shout out to her, because she was truly an incredible individual. Shout out to the people who also worked with us, Kelly Marks, Gabby. Shout out to them, because they were also really helpful. Truly just grateful for the opportunity to even be considered to represent the city. And I think I collected a total of 600 something votes, something like that. Or it might have been a little less, I think, but I believe Vanessa collected the most votes, then was Amy, then was I, and then Connor. And it was tough, and it's tough to put yourself out there. It's tough to be susceptible to other people's criticisms. But I'm happy that I did those things, because it also gave me that cushion that I needed to do this. And I was doing that also before, like even when I was first doing my podcast, but still, like it's so different, because you're out in the public, you're out putting your ideas there, you're susceptible to being criticized. And I was criticized a lot, especially me having you know, been working at the time with a county legislator, who I actually interviewed, Colin Smith, and shout out to him, because eventually everything was fine. And you know, it is what it is. Sometimes there's conflict, and sometimes you have to work through it. And I want to say that was one conflict that definitely gave me more confidence in terms of like, you know, figuring out what can I do as an individual who does work for the government, but also still has her own life outside of it, right? And so, you know, like I said, it was something that I worked through, and eventually everything was fine, which I was super grateful for. But it was definitely tough. It was tough to be criticized and really to be, you know, not demonized, but like just, I guess, downplayed. And it's hard, because you don't realize how much it impacts you until after it's all over. And you know, eventually the campaign came to an end, we all lost, and you know, for some time there was still like some turmoil locally, in terms of like, trying to make sure that at least what we were trying to push forward was going to be accomplished by the new committee. I'm sorry, by the new council members. And so, I think it was fine overall. Either way, I think as long as you do something to try to create change, that's all that matters. Some might disagree that if you don't actually succeed, it's not actually doing anything. But I think that trying is better than not trying at all. And I'm really happy that I was part of this momentum locally, because Peekskill had also not seen a primary in several years, like a legitimate primary. And so, challenging people and ideologies are so important. And at the time, it felt so big, like it felt so significant to me, like that I was doing this. And, I was scared and nervous because I'm like, I don't know how people are going to feel. Like, it cares so much about the exterior, and in some ways you kind of have to if you're going to try to do work like that, like you're representing the people in the community. So you have to be willing and open to that. But at the same time, it's hard. But overall, I'm happy that I did it, and I'm happy that I did it the way that I wanted to. And ruffled feathers, but I think that the only way to create change is to ruffle feathers, and to not be so quiet, and to not be silent, and to be vocal. But it also showed me the value in just saying, like, F it, like if people are going to judge you, they're going to judge you regardless, whether you do it this way or that way. People will always have an opinion on what you do and how you do them. So you might as well just, pursue what you want to do and do it how you want to do it, because people will always have an opinion. So I think that was really my biggest takeaway from running on this ticket, but also that the establishment is definitely very much so strong, and it will back its individuals. And that's part of what disheartens me a lot, I think, and what was so evident to me afterwards is that you could want the best for your community, you could want the best, and you could want to advocate for that. But as long as the people who are at the top continue to share the same perspective and not be willing to have a conversation around ethicality and what really is possible, because a lot of it is about what's viable, what's possible. But I think if you're not willing to expand and at least be like, okay, let me at least try to make this a possibility, we're going to continue having the same results over and over again. And a lot of it is like being passed down a torch. And so that's why what we did was so significant, because it was like disrupting all of that and saying, you know what, we're not going to let you continue to pass down the torch without there being a legitimate options for people to choose from. So it was important for us to do this, and I'm happy that I did it. But it opened my eyes to several things, and so I think for the most part I've covered that. And I'm hoping maybe one day I run for office again, but I am not very sure yet. I think that it's normal for us to have changing aspirations and thoughts, but I don't know. It's being out there is in that capacity is very different than being out in the public in this capacity. So, I want to give myself some time to figure that out, because campaigning is a lot of work. And like I said, it was very different being in the back versus being out in front. So yeah, but either way, I congratulated the people who won, because, they won, and it is what it is. And sometimes things don't always go your way, but it's just a way to redirect yourself to something better. And, after that, I ended up continuing to stay at my job for some time. So like I said, I was working for County Legislator Colin Smith at the time, and it was great. I had such a wonderful experience working with him throughout this time since the pandemic started. And I loved it. And I love that I was able to have these important conversations with him. Being able to be in a position to also help people in that capacity was great for me, because, I was helping somebody make those things possible. And I feel like I really did leave that role feeling very fulfilled and feeling like I actually achieved something there, so much more than I could have, I think, just on my own. And so shout out to him for coming on the show, and also for having me as his aide. And I was with him for about 2.5 years, because we started at the beginning of the pandemic, essentially, like that year. And then I just finished working for him actually this past July. So shout out to me for also taking another leap of faith. And that's why I wanted to also do this episode and kind of give you guys an idea of like where I've been and what I've been doing, because I think having that context is important. Like, I didn't just come back doing this without having like done other things. And I feel like those events were very significant. And I hope that, you know, by me sharing this information, it might help you, you know, make decisions that might be important to you right now. And yeah, so after working for Colin for 2.5 years, I decided, you know what, I think it's time for me to retire from politics, at least temporarily, to pursue this again, because I have always loved talking to people. I've always loved being able to have really like difficult conversations. And another thing that helped me, I think, have those difficult conversations was being like seeing dating. I guess dating is the right word. So I was dating at the time. It was I happened to be dating somebody at the time, and that relationship was not its healthiest, and it got pretty unhealthy, I think, towards the end. But I think what it taught me more than anything was to have those uncomfortable conversations and to be okay, and just know that like conflict doesn't always have to be a very aggressive thing, and it doesn't always have to be an aggressive conversation. It could just be something as simple as having a disagreement and saying, okay, you know what, like this just isn't what it is. It's not what I'm looking for. So let's move on from there. So yeah, so I was in this relationship and this seeing this individual for a while. And I think because it got unhealthy, it actually showed me a couple of things, but I think primarily it showed me the value in learning my own worth. And I think that concept of like knowing your worth is so easily thrown around, because it really isn't easy to know your worth, especially if you deal with self-esteem issues and deal with or have like issues related to your identity and how you feel within your own body. And so that's something I've always struggled with for a really long time, and that played out a lot. So I think it also showed me that relationships can be really, really big mirrors, and relationships or the individual can really be a reflection of how you feel on the inside, if that makes sense. But it also shows you like what you need to work on. So I think a lot of insecurities came up during that time due to a lot of like things that I felt like were not in alignment with what I wanted from my partner at the time. And so you know, I think like it helped me develop more discernment as well, because you can have chemistry with someone and still not be compatible. And that is something that I really hope that whoever listens to this, like, you know, that is that you can have chemistry and still not be compatible with somebody. Like, I think it's very easy to get those things confused and mixed up, but I think that it's important to have very similar values, to know this individual, to know what they are interested in or what they don't like. And if those things don't feel right to you, to just let it go, let it be, and move on from those things, because there's too many people in the world to assume that this one person is going to fulfill everything that you need, or that they're even close to what it is. So, you know, as you date people, you start to realize you get closer and closer to really the person that you want to be with, whether you decide you want to marry somebody, I don't know. But, you know, for me, it was important to learn that thing. And I think because that person doubted my own worth so much, it caused me to also think about my worth and to think about how much did I love myself, how much was I willing to endure, and what was I willing to not accept. And it was very difficult to learn all those things, because I learned them in not the best ways, but I feel like in hindsight they were important and they played out the way that they did for very specific reasons. So, you know, having discernment, knowing your worth and knowing that that journey on its own is not easy. It is not easy to know your worth. It's very easy to say, love yourself, know your worth, know that you deserve this, this, and that. But until you fully feel it and until you fully embrace that within yourself, like I don't think anyone can tell you that it's easy to do that. So, if anyone is in a tumultuous relationship, or if you're going through recovery from something like that, just know that everything will be okay eventually. But learn from the relationship, learn from the people that you're with. I do believe that everyone is a teacher in your life. I do think that people come into your life to teach you very important lessons that you need to learn, and learn them, and ask yourself, what lesson did I learn from this? What can I take away from this? And how can I be better, so then that way I attract people who also are in alignment with what I want for myself. And it takes time to get there, to know what you want, but I think when you start to feel deep down inside like this isn't right, or you feel like there could be more, like once you start to have those thoughts, I think that's when it's time for you to say, okay, so maybe I need to reconsider the kind of relationship I have with this individual, and really with anybody, whether they're romantic or platonic. I think it's really important to figure out, what kind of relationships you want to have with people. What are you willing to tolerate and not tolerate? And oftentimes you have to go through things that you cannot tolerate to figure out if you can tolerate them or not. I think it's very human to be like, okay, I hear you, but I'm still going to learn on my own anyways and make my own mistakes. And I think that's what ended up happening to me, at least. And I'm grateful that as much as I really went through it, I do feel like I came out the other side feeling so much more freer and more, have a better understanding of who I am. And I think that I'm really grateful. And I think, sometimes I'm not saying every time, but I do think that there are times where there are good people who do shitty things. There are good people who don't know themselves well enough yet, who are afraid to get to know themselves more, who are afraid of feeling. People have very different backgrounds and very different upbringings, and those all matter too. How you learn to love when you were young, like all of these things are so key and so important. And I learned that along the way. Like I learned how important those things were, and I was learning them prior to us, like, I guess, getting together. But it wasn't until after that I really recognized the value and the importance of knowing those things and knowing them about yourself, first of all, because I think when you know yourself well, you can help others. But until you know yourself, and really until you're willing enough to say, I want to get to know myself, like you can't help other people. You have to help yourself first before you can help others. Shout out to Henry Thoreau for that, because he kind of put me onto that concept as well. So definitely had a huge struggle learning to relearn myself and learning to love myself even more, and learning, my value. And because it was challenged so much, it really, I started to challenge it too. And, even to this day, like I'm still, kind of like, all right, so, I'm making sure that I'm putting all of these things to practice, still learning myself. And I think ultimately you start to realize that you will never fully know yourself. Like you're always changing, you're always developing new skills, you're always developing and thinking about other things. We're always growing. So what you feel like mattered to you at one point might be completely different now. So, I'm still learning. I'm still human. I'm still learning all these things. So that was really big. It was definitely that, on top of running for city council, like all at the same time, was incredibly difficult, on top of the fact that we were in the middle of a pandemic. So it was definitely hard. I was definitely going through it the past like 2.5 years. So, I'm glad that I'm at this point in my life now, because I feel like I have finally come back to myself. I feel like I've finally come to this point where I'm really more free and really more in control and in alignment. And I think realizing that I was a co-creator of a lot of those situations, some people might be like, they don't agree with that, but I think to some extent, like, we are co-creators even in those really bad situations, because it means that we are allowing them, right? And that was something that I understood much later down the line, was that I allowed a lot of this behavior by inviting it into my home or inviting it into my space, instead of seeing it and then pushing it away and saying, this isn't what I want for myself. So I was a co-creator. And so that helped me also realize, though, that I could also create better situations for myself. And, it seems like kind of like, duh, like, of course you can do that. But it's hard to see that when you're in a headspace where you cannot think clearly and where you're just not in a healthy mindset. So, I'm happy that all of that did happen when it did, because I think it was supposed to. But now I know better, and that's really it. Is like, once you know better, you do better for yourself. And of course you make mistakes. It's normal, it's human, but as long as you continue to implement the new things that you've learned in your life, that's all that matters. And one thing I did want to cover, actually, because I feel like the whole pandemic has been about growing. One thing that I wanted to share was that last season, the last video I posted was actually about COVID and my recovery with COVID. And so one thing that happened afterwards, that happened throughout this whole time, it's actually in the picture here, which is why my hair is so short and why it's no longer, well, it's not a better spot now. It's much longer, but I actually lost a lot of hair during COVID, or after COVID, in my recovery process. Like, I think 3 months afterwards, like in the summer, I remember I started losing a bunch of hair. Like, it was crazy. And I remember, like, I would just go like this, or I would walk around the house and there would be hair everywhere. Like, it was just coming out like nobody's business. And for whatever reason, my hair was just leaving me. And it might have been all of the stress my body had gone through with COVID, but it was so scary, because I remember, like, I would get in the shower and clumps of hair would just, I remember they would fall out, and I was like, what is happening? Like, my hair was definitely a big part of my identity. Oh, and my identity has been challenged very much so in the past that I guess the past 2.5 years. But I feel like I've really, like, gone through an identity crisis, and now I'm like, okay, I have to leave my job to figure out who I really am, to really feel and process everything that's happened to me. And this is where I am now. So now I'm doing this podcast. I'm going back to doing what I really love the most, which is having conversations that are important. And I feel like I've learned so much, met so many great people doing different projects, doing different things, had the chance to actually be an advocate for the for women's reproductive rights. I did it 2 times on 2 different occasions. And it was great. It was really great to be able to be part of something so important. And to share my abortion story, I have a clip on my Instagram, Amy J. Vele. And if you would like to watch it, you can. It's still up on my page. And it was great. It was scary, absolutely. But I think part of what I've learned in this time that I've been away has been that, I have a very specific calling, and I think this is part of it. I think it's still in development. It's still much bigger than what I can conceive right now, but I think it's important for me to continue doing this work and being vulnerable. And I think helping people see the value and the importance in being vulnerable. And I think that's what having these conversations is being vulnerable, being able to be real with people, and being able to change things. Because I think when you're not real with the people around you, and you hide things, and everything just stays as like a taboo, and nothing changes. And so in order for change to occur, you need to be able to push yourself. You need to be able to conquer fear and really, like, run towards it. So, being able to share my story so publicly was very scary, but I knew it was important, because I know that there are people out there who are afraid, and at the time, like, scared to share their story. And I was like, if this story can reach at least one person and can help make a difference in their life, like I've done enough. I've done enough by being able to share my story and being able to say that, you know, just because I did it doesn't mean I'm a terrible person and I'm not going to hell. Unfortunately, that's just what life called for at the time, and it was a difficult decision. So, you know, I did that. You know, just meeting great people. I've just had such a great 2.5 years, like in hindsight, regardless of everything I've been through. I've had a wonderful time. And I've learned so much and I've grown so much, and I'm so thankful that I even have the skills and the capacity to look back and say, this is what I can take away from these situations, and this is how I can grow, and this is how I can move forward. And I hope that you guys have enjoyed this episode. I feel like it was kind of fast, kind of all over the place. I tried to go in chronological order, but, you know, kind of like went a little back and forth. But thank you so much for listening, and thank you for being patient and for sticking around, for watching my videos, for just being here and supporting me and being willing to listen to me talk and have these conversations with other people. I will definitely do more single, like just me podcast episodes, because I think it would be good to have them in there. So if you liked this style, I would love to do it again for you guys. And if you have any questions or any suggestions, you know where to leave that suggestion in the comments below. And if you like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. This is so weird, but yeah, you know, we're here to break the glass ceiling, and we're here to do something different. We're here to be better. We're here to grow. We're here to challenge ideologies. We're here to challenge what we think is the norm, and that's who I am, and that's what I'm going to present to you guys, and that's what I've been trying to give, hopefully, with these past 2 episodes and with this one too. So if there are any subjects you guys want me to talk about, you know what to do. Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for listening to me talk and for supporting me. And I've got some great guests coming up, so stay tuned. And I've been having a great August. I hope you have too. And stick around, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Peace out. See you guys next time. So I completely forgot that I'm going to be doing a new thing where I'm going to answer your questions. I actually did that last time for the first season. So if you don't follow me on Instagram, definitely do, because I will be answering your questions on episodes when I do single ones. So whenever I will have single, you know, podcast episodes, I'll be doing that. So make sure you go ahead and follow me there. So I got 2 questions and I'm going to answer them. So one of them is, you're single because... I'm single because a lot of dudes playing. If that's my honest answer, yeah, I think so. But also just because I'm doing a lot, I'm learning about what I want. And, you know, I would say I'm still like dating people, but I'm not like looking to be too tied down right now, because but like, you know, I'm like kind of done with that part of my life for the time being. I do want like a healthy partner. Like I like the idea of being able to get to know people and seeing like what people present and what they bring to the table. But I think for now, I'm just really interested in getting to know people in a very genuine way, where it's like, even if it doesn't develop into something super serious, at least I have these healthy and open relationships with people, even if they're brief. And honestly, no one really has an idea of like when the relationship is going to end. So I'm just trying to take a different approach, trying to make sure that I've learned, or I'm implementing all of the things that I've learned, you know, now in my dating life. So yeah, so I'm single because I want to be, and because no one's really like, I've not met my match yet. So there's that. The next question is, what are my thoughts on climate change? And super briefly, I think that humans have accelerated climate change drastically. I think the planet was always changing, but it was never supposed to change this fast. And we've just accelerated it so much because we are engulfed in comfort and would rather be comfortable than to do what's necessary to survive. So yeah, that's pretty much my like super fast summed up version of what I think of climate change. It's real. Don't get it twisted. It's definitely real. And it is changing very rapidly. And I think that we have the possibility of doing so much more to prevent that or to really slow down that acceleration and to do something. But I think that corporate greed will always win. Not always, but I do have very strong opinions that I think that corporations, conglomerates, they run the world essentially. They are very much entrenched in political happenings, and money is a big one too. People are bought. People who are supposed to represent us are bought oftentimes. And it can be very hard to make that difference. And I think that that's a big problem. But I do believe that as an individual, you can do something important. And if I could, say, like, if I could suggest something, it would be to cut out animal products as much as possible, because we produce a lot of food just to feed the food that most people eat. So if we cut out the middleman, like, we would do the world such a huge favor. So yeah, so if you reduce your consumption of animal products, meat, especially meat, but also dairy products, you would be taking a really big action step to helping prevent or continue accelerating climate change. So yeah, so those are the questions. That's all we have for today. Like I said, thank you so much for being here, for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, give it a thumbs up, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks so much. This is always Amy, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.